everyone to this installment of the 2020 lecture series at the Frontier Culture Museum of Virginia. My name is Doretta Sobolewski and I'm the research coordinator here at the museum. Our speaker today is Bert Dunkerly, who will discuss the boundary controversy between Pennsylvania and Virginia in the 18th century. Before I properly introduce Bert, I want to extend our sincere gratitude to Virginia Humanities, who support this lecture series with a generous grant. Virginia Humanities has been a wonderful funder of this program, and we very much value their support, but especially during the COVID-19 crisis. Unfortunately, we are currently not able to host this lecture in person due to the impact of the pandemic, but the museum is open and we have health and safety precautions in place so you, your family, and friends can visit us safely. We have different activities going on at the museum all the time, and lectures like this one are just one of the programs we offer. Now, the lecture series is definitely one of my favorite programs here at the museum, and I love to learn from wonderful scholars like Bert and all the other speakers who we have lined up for this year. Here at the museum, we value education and learning, and it seems like you do too. After all, you found your way here to this video. So, in this moment of crisis when museums like ours are struggling from the impact of COVID-19, I would like to ask you to consider making a donation to the American Frontier Culture Foundation. Your support will help us continue to offer programs like this lecture to you and anyone else who shares a passion for American history and frontier culture. To make a donation, please click the link in the comment section below or go to our website, www.frontiermuseum.org. You can find the donate button in the lower left corner of our website. No amount is too small and every dollar truly counts. Your support is so very much appreciated. And without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker, Bert Dunkerly. Bert is a park ranger at Richmond National Battlefield Park. He has authored numerous books on the Revolution, Civil War, and historic preservation. He's also a native of Pennsylvania and has family who live in the disputed region we'll talk about today in his talk, Border Wars, the Pennsylvania-Virginia boundary controversy. Bert, thank you so much for presenting this interesting topic.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, before we get started with your presentation, tell us a little how you got interested in this topic.
Well, like you just said, I'm from Pennsylvania, and I'll try to be neutral as we talk about this today. But my family, my mother's family is from Western Pennsylvania, the Pittsburgh area. And this was something I didn't know a lot about, but every now and then I would come across something or read about something related to this. I think it's not a well-known topic. And a couple of years ago, I just got interested and dove into it and researched it and visited some of the sites that I'll talk about today.
Excellent. Well, I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. So if you'd like to get started.
Sure. I will bring up the PowerPoint here. Let's see. There we go. I'll start out by saying that obviously right now Virginia and Pennsylvania do not border each other, but they used to, and they actually claimed some of the same land. They had overlapping claims in what is now Western Pennsylvania. And a lot of us know about how West Virginia was created from Virginia, and Virginia ceded Western lands in what's now Kentucky in the Northwest. But I think this is a topic that a lot of people don't know about, is Virginia's claim to this Western land that became Pennsylvania all the way up to the Great Lakes. Now, the area that I'm talking about and I'll be referring to today is highlighted here in the white on this map. This is a modern map of the area, and Pittsburgh is the major city in the region. And of course, today, Maryland and West Virginia are between Virginia and this part of Pennsylvania. but this is the area that I'm going to be talking about. Pennsylvania has a lot of boundary problems. If you look at this map, this just shows you some of the issues that the Penn family, who owns Pennsylvania, are dealing with. Connecticut actually claimed a large chunk of the northern part of the state, which you can see along the top there. There was a boundary dispute with Maryland along the bottom. That's going to get settled by the Mason-Dixon line, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. And then over on the left, you see the purple area is Virginia's claim, which we'll talk about today. If all those other colonies had gotten their way, Pennsylvania would be pretty small. It'd just be that little strip you see in the middle, that green strip. But as this unfolds, both Virginia and Pennsylvania are going to claim this land. They're both going to establish county courts, militias, the systems of government, and try to run and lay claim to those areas at the same time. It's going to get really confusing and very close to violent. This is one shot of the area. If some of the viewers know this area, it's beautiful, it's mountainous. A lot of rivers flow through this area. The first incursions into this area are in the 1750s during the French and Indian War. And a young George Washington is very involved with that. George Washington was with the Virginia militia, and Virginia laid claim to this land. The French, coming down from Canada, had moved in and were building forts and claiming the land for France. There's going to be a series of battles starting in the French and Indian War. Fort Necessity, which is one of Washington's first defeats, one of his first battles. There are campaigns launched by the British, who are using troops from Virginia, Pennsylvania, and other colonies to reclaim this territory, led by General Braddock, later General Forbes. And eventually, by the end of the 1750s, the British have pushed the French out and claimed this area. This is a shot of Braddocks Road, which some of the viewers might be familiar with. General Braddock built a road from Cumberland, Maryland, all the way up towards Pittsburgh before they were defeated and driven back. George Washington passed along this road many times going into the area. And here's a monument to George Washington in Pittsburgh at the site of Braddock's defeat. Again, early battles give Washington a lot of leadership experience. And this is the prize. This is the goal of both sides, French, British, Virginia, Pennsylvania. They're all fighting for this. The forks of the Ohio, today the city of Pittsburgh. The Allegheny and Monongahela rivers come together at the forks, and this forms the Ohio River, which then flows west. This photograph or this drawing shows you Fort Pitt, which the British built, named in honor of Prime Minister William Pitt. George Washington visited this site before there was a fort, when he was with the Virginia militia, and he wrote, "I spent some time in viewing the rivers and the land in the forks. I think it extremely well suited for a fort, as it has absolute command of both rivers." So Washington is exploring this area and noting its importance, and of course gaining military experience as he does. Now, in the meantime, after the French and Indian War is over, Pennsylvania and Maryland finally settle their boundary dispute, and that is done with the Mason-Dixon Survey. 2 English surveyors are going to settle that boundary dispute between Pennsylvania and Maryland. And if you look at this map, you'll see on the right-hand side, just below Philadelphia, there's an arc. Mason and Dixon began their survey in the town of Newcastle, Delaware. and they drew an arc 12 miles around that town and then ran the line west. And that was to be the boundary between Pennsylvania and Maryland. The problem was they got stopped short. The charter for Pennsylvania said that their boundary is supposed to run 5 degrees longitude west. And Mason and Dixon could not complete their survey. They got as far as this point in the Allegheny Mountains, and they had to stop because of hostile Indians. This is in 1767. And today, as you can see, there's actually a marker for this is where Mason and Dixon's survey ended. They couldn't finish it. So the land to the west of that and north of that is still going to be in dispute between Pennsylvania and Virginia. In the meantime, once the French and Indian War is over, settlers flood into this area of modern-day Western Pennsylvania. Because the Indian threat is gone, the French threat is gone, and because a lot of people who fought in that conflict were awarded land. George Washington was awarded land for his service to the Virginia militia. And so Pennsylvania and Virginia are granting land in this area. They both claim it. And that's what really going to fuel this conflict as we move into the 1770s. But of course, there's other things going on during the early 1770s. There's a lot of tension with the mother country over taxes and representation and things like that. And so as we go forward through the next couple of years, there's events happening here on the frontier, and there's events happening along the eastern seaboard, and they're happening simultaneously, as I'm going to show you. Well, in 1772, Virginia lays out a county called West Augusta County. And the county courthouse is Fort Pitt. It is 270 miles, by the way, from Stanton. When they do that, they are physically laying claim to that area. When you have a courthouse, you have legitimacy, because now you can do legal things like grant land and organize the militia and things like that. And so tension really starts to build between settlers from those two colonies who have moved into that area. George Grogan is a Indian trader, and he writes, "The western bounds of Pennsylvania could not come any distance on this side of the hills," meaning the Allegheny Mountains. Pennsylvania couldn't possibly own this land. George Wilson was a Pennsylvania justice who wrote that the settlers were opposing every one of Penn's laws. And settlers were threatening Pennsylvania officials who tried to collect taxes and enforce Pennsylvania laws. Meeting armed resistance, people pulling out their weapons to stop any Pennsylvania authorities from exercising their business. The governor of Virginia is Lord Dunmore, and he has a friend of his named Dr. John Connolly, and he sends Connolly out to Fort Pitt, and he puts him in charge of running Virginia's affairs. And Connolly says Pittsburgh and all of the western settlements could not possibly be within the limits of Pennsylvania. And just to make it interesting, that was 1772. In 1773, the very next year, Pennsylvania establishes a courthouse just 25 miles away at a place called Hannahstown. Now, Hannahstown today is Greensburg, town of Greensburg, Pennsylvania. And this is a photograph of the reconstructed village there at Hannahstown. So now Pennsylvania has a county court, a county militia system. This is called Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. The Westmoreland County, PA, and West Augusta County, Virginia, are now physically overlapping in the same territory. And each of these colonies is granting land in the same area. The Pennsylvania clerk of court is a man named Arthur Sinclair, and he is in touch with a lot of the settlers in this area and the Indian traders who are moving out. And one of them says to him, talking about Virginia, "We have to put a stop to these proceedings, as it creates the greatest disturbances." The next year, 1774, is the year of the Boston Massacre. Just to put that in perspective, tensions are building between the colonies and England. But for people on the frontier, they've got these issues right in front of them. Also in 1774, that's the year of the what's called Dunmore's War. Lord Dunmore from Virginia will launch a war against the Shawnee, and that is fought along the Ohio River in what's now West Virginia and Ohio, a little bit further to the west. But again, it's Virginia laying claim to that western land and fighting the Indians, pushing them out to claim more of that land. Things start to come to a head in 1774. Connolly from Virginia is actually going to be arrested by Sinclair from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania militia will show up at Fort Pitt and arrest him and drag him back to Hannahstown. He agrees to go. He agrees that if they let him go free, he will lay off Virginia's claims, but he doesn't. So I think this is a good point to talk about what are the claims of these two colonies. What's the source of this confusion? And so here we have, on the left is Lord Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia. On the right is John Penn. And John Penn is the son of William Penn, the founder of the colony of Pennsylvania. In 1774, these two men are going to start to exchange letters because things have now gotten to the point where their settlers are bumping into each other and rival militias are forming, and violence is just a step away. Penn sends a letter to Dunmore saying that he is surprised at Virginia's claim, and he sends a map showing that the land belongs to Pennsylvania. Of course, Dunmore disagrees and writes back saying that this is the county of West Augusta, Virginia. And Penn replied to that saying that he requested that your lordship neither grant lands nor exercise the government of Virginia within these limits. And they each claimed the forks of the Ohio, Pittsburgh, as theirs. Well, this exchange of letters doesn't go anywhere. And by then, other events are taking off, because in October of 1774, the Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia, the first Continental Congress. And so they each have bigger fish to fry on the eastern seaboard. And actually, Dunmore is soon going to be forced out of Virginia as the revolution starts. And Penn will also lose power with a new government taking over in Pennsylvania. So things just continue to escalate. The next year, 1775, a Pennsylvania tax collector, William Elliot, is arrested for disturbing the minds of His Majesty's good people by demanding an arbitrary and illegal tax of the laws of Pennsylvania. And Virginia is going to continue to move ahead with its colonial government in West Augusta County. They start building roads. They start setting up county courts. They start issuing licenses for taverns and businesses. They start issuing deeds for land. This just continues. In April of 1775, we have the battles of Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. The revolution has started. Here on the frontier, when word of that reaches these settlers, they want to support the cause of their home colonies, or states now. And on May 16th at Fort Pitt, the West Augusta County Militia organizes, and they gather military supplies. And ironically, on the very same day, 25 miles away at Hannistown, Pennsylvania militia organizes as well. And they will both send troops to the east to be part of the armies that are being organized to fight the British. In the meantime, Virginia will arrest Pennsylvania judges, drag them from Hannistown over to Fort Pitt. Then the Pennsylvania militia will break into Fort Pitt, break them out of jail, take them back to Hannistown. And so this just goes back and forth. The county officials of the two counties talk about a truce to try to figure this out, and they can't come to any kind of agreement. And I want to go back to the claims of these two colonies. If you look at this map, this shows you, if you see the purple lines, Virginia's charter from 1609 is what Lord Dunmore and the Virginians are basing their claim on. And that charter from 1609, which is 2 years after Jamestown is settled, basically said that for 200 miles either way, north or south of Jamestown, is Virginia's eastern border. So that upper purple line starts what's in now New Jersey and runs to the northwest up through the Great Lakes. And the lower line is all the way down in modern day North Carolina. And it runs indefinitely. So the western boundary of Virginia is the Pacific Ocean in 1609. And this is Pennsylvania's charter from 1681, granted to William Penn by the king. And it says that Pennsylvania's eastern boundary is the Delaware River. And that's a pretty easy landmark. Can't miss that, can't move it, can't argue it. It establishes a southern boundary with Maryland, which has obviously been in dispute, but it says the western boundary is 5 degrees west longitude from the east. So if you can picture that map, Pennsylvania's western boundary should be 5 degrees from the eastern point, which is near Philadelphia. But remember, Mason and Dixon couldn't complete their survey. And in the meantime, Virginia settlers have moved in, and we've got this situation now. And this is Arthur Sinclair. I mentioned him earlier. He is the clerk of court for Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. And he is the man organizing the militia and sending them out to arrest Virginia judges and dealing with the Virginians in Hannistown. Well, Virginia continues to organize and further subdivide this land. In 1776, they divide up West Augusta County into 3 new counties. And this is the kind of process that you see all over on the frontier as areas get settled. We have these big counties, like we had in Eastern Virginia, and then they just get divided up into smaller counties. They create 3 new counties called Youghioghenia, Monongalia, and Ohio. And they're named after the rivers that flow through that area. And this is a picture of the Monongalia County Courthouse site, which today is near Washington, Pennsylvania. And this map shows you the 3 colors are the 3 counties. The gray is Ohio County. Monongalia County is the light blue on the top, and the purple is, Youghioghenia is on top, Monongalia is on the bottom. Those are obviously Indian names for the rivers that flowed through that area. And Fort Pitt is kind of in the center of the top there at Youghiogheny County. So furthermore, Virginia sends out detailed instructions about building 3 new county courthouses in each of these new counties and appointing justices, organizing militia. We have information about some of these instructions. They say that in the case of Monongalia County, they are to build a jail and a courthouse in the following manner and at the following place. The jail and the courthouse are to be included in one whole and entire building of round sound oak, 24 feet long, 16 feet high, 2 stories high. The lower story to be 8 feet high, partitioned in the middle with squared hewed logs, with locks and bars to the door and windows. And the instructions just go on about the details of what these county courthouses are supposed to look like. They're obviously, frontier type structures. They're wooden log cabins, but it's a semblance of permanence, trying to establish their authority on the landscape there. And here's another map that may be a little clearer to see. Same thing. You see those 3 new Virginia counties, but this shows you the modern counties of Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, and Virginia. And you might be able to make out the modern boundary of Pennsylvania here. That shows you what Virginia is claiming. And obviously, 1776, the revolution is in full swing now on the East Coast. So while these events are happening on the frontier, the respective governments of Virginia and Pennsylvania are very focused on fighting the war effort. And here's a picture of a historic marker that talks about the site of one of those courthouses in Pennsylvania. One more map. I'm a map lover, sorry. Again, it shows you those 3 counties. And the red line is the modern Pennsylvania state line. Well, again, both colonies or states now are raising troops to go fight in the army in the Continental Army under General Washington. And they're going to be fighting in all the major battles like Brandywine and Germantown and so on. But there's still going to be militia organized on the frontier to face off against each other. And both states will continue to grant lands. George Rogers Clark of Virginia is going to raise troops for his Western campaign that goes out into modern day Illinois and Indiana, claiming that Western land for Virginia. Fort Pitt is going to be an important base of supplies for Virginia and its troops that are fighting further out on the frontier. The British are not really involved in this area, but they do encourage the Indians of the region to attack the settlers. And they don't care who they're attacking. Pennsylvanians, Virginians, they're all American settlers. So from Canada, the British are supplying and encouraging the natives to attack and raid the frontier. And they do. Well, this goes on for a couple years. And by 1779, the Continental Congress realizes this is really undercutting the war effort against the British. And they encourage Virginia and Pennsylvania to sit down and settle this. They also encourage both states to stop granting land, because that's the key problem. Patrick Henry of Virginia is not happy with that. He calls it a violation of public faith that the Continental Congress would step into the affairs of these individual states. Of course, remember, Patrick Henry favors small government. He doesn't want to have a big federal government. Well, in 1779, both states appoint commissioners to settle the boundary. And they go through a lot of discussion. One thing that comes up among the settlers of Pennsylvania is a proposed new state called Westsylvania, which would have extended from modern-day Pennsylvania all the way down into what's now West Virginia and Kentucky. A lot of the settlers on the Pennsylvania frontier felt abandoned, neglected by the government in Philadelphia. And they thought, we can't get any help from the East. We'll form our own state. And this proposed state was sent to the Continental Congress. The Continental Congress just ignored it. They let Pennsylvania deal with it. And Pennsylvania obviously wanted nothing to do with this, so they just quashed it, and nothing ever came of this idea of a Westsylvania, but it was proposed. And I do want to mention, because people might be wondering, Pennsylvania and Virginia are going at it over this land. Isn't there another state in the middle? Maryland. Maryland's boundary was actually settled in the 1760s, before a lot of this heated up. And this photograph shows you what's called the Fairfax Stone. This is a spring, which is the headwaters of the Potomac River. So the Potomac River starts right there in a mountainside in western Maryland. And as you look at this photograph, looking directly north, that's Maryland. To the south is now West Virginia. But they had agreed that the headwater of the Potomac River was the western boundary of Maryland. So Maryland's boundary was set. That left Virginia and Pennsylvania to figure things out. This map shows you some of the proposals that went back and forth between the commissioners from both states. It's a land grab. Both sides are trying to get as much as they can. So at times, Pennsylvania is proposing moving the boundary south. Virginia is proposing moving it north. Pennsylvania wants that western boundary as far west as it can go, and Virginia wants to see it to the east. If you can make it out, there's a red dotted line that follows the rivers here. That was proposed as one possible boundary because it would mirror the Delaware River on the east. Delaware River makes that kind of S shape, and this was proposed. Pennsylvania said no to that. Well, after all this wrangling, they finally agreed that probably the easiest and best thing to do is to use the boundary that's already been established by Mason and Dixon. Remember, they never finished that survey. So we'll run it west until we get to 5 degrees west longitude. And then at 5 degrees west, the line will run north to the Great Lakes, Lake Erie. And this was agreed upon by both states in 1780. Now, 1780 is the year that the British invade Virginia. There's going to be, the war is coming directly into Virginia. Obviously, Yorktown will happen the next year. So they've got bigger problems to deal with. And I think that's part of why they settled for this. They knew they were going to lose land. They didn't know how much. So this agreement that they finally reach says that we'll extend the Mason-Dixon line west to the 5 degree point and then run the line north, and that will be Pennsylvania's boundary forever. That's the language that they use. When news of this reaches the settlers, obviously Pennsylvania settlers are happy. Virginia settlers, not so much. And there's the issue of Fort Pitt. The Continental Army had also sent troops to Fort Pitt along with Virginia militia. And in this transition period, as the Virginians are supposed to be pulling out, they're very uncooperative. Pennsylvania is not quite ready to assert its authority and send people out there. And the commander at Fort Pitt of the Continental troops is General William Irvin. And he writes, "There never was, nor I hope never will be, such a wretched, villainous place as this. I do not remember any part of my life spent to so little purpose." He couldn't get anything done. No one would work with him. He's a member of the Continental Army, and he's stuck between Virginia and Pennsylvania officials who won't work with anybody, with each other. Very frustrating. But as we move into the 1780s, what we will see is that that boundary line gets surveyed to the west by 1784, and then by 1785, the line is run north up to Lake Erie. So Virginia had 3 counties. Well, obviously, Yahogania County is gone. It's entirely in Pennsylvania. Monongalia County is so small. What's left of it is so small. It can't be its own county, so it gets absorbed into the other counties south of that. And all that they are left with was Ohio County, which today is in the panhandle of West Virginia, that little piece that reaches up between modern-day Pennsylvania and Ohio. And this map shows you now what is left of Virginia after the end of the Revolution. I mentioned that the settlers here are not happy with this, the Virginia settlers. A group of them will send a protest to the governor of Virginia saying, "You have not, by proclamation or otherwise, given us public notice that you have cast us off and given us to Pennsylvania. This makes us think we are bound by our oath to pay no allegiance to any other state until we are discharged in a regular way from our former allegiance." And they refused to submit to Pennsylvania authority. 600 people signed that petition. When Westmoreland County tax collectors start coming into the area and assessing land and start to collect taxes for Pennsylvania, they're driven off. Shots are fired, no one's hurt, but they're met by angry armed mobs of Virginians who do not recognize Pennsylvania's authority. One tax collector wrote, "They say they will not pay taxes or be obedient to our laws." Now, the revolution ended in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. And so now both states can really turn their full attention to this with the revolution over. I want to come back to George Washington, who is one of the first people to enter this area and explore it in the 1750s. And here we are 30 years later. Washington was very big on Western land, both for himself and for Virginia and for the nation as a whole. He saw the West as the future. Washington himself acquired a lot of land in those Virginia counties that have been turned over to Pennsylvania. And in the meantime, a lot of squatters have moved onto his land. In 1784, 1 year after the revolution is over, former General George Washington, hero of the Revolution, traveled to Western Pennsylvania over the Braddock Road, and he confronted those people. And he writes, "This day the people who lived on my land came forth with their presentations to it and to inquire my right." And he talks about how they spent the whole day going back and forth, and they would not leave and they would not pay for it. So here is George Washington, the most famous American, the hero of the Revolution, and these frontier settlers are ignoring his claim to the land. He never did get paid for it. Very frustrating. Now, obviously, over the past decade, both states have been granting land in the same place. So we're going to have overlap, and we're going to have claimants from one or the other maybe next to each other. And this map is from what's now Washington County, Pennsylvania, and it shows some of the conflicting land claims. And I know it's kind of crazy how they surveyed these properties, but what Pennsylvania and Virginia agreed to, in addition to the big agreement about the boundary, was that people who had legitimate claims to the land from Virginia, those claims would be recognized. So if you had a Virginia land grant and you were settled on that land, it was yours. If there was an instance where land was granted by both states, it would go to the county court, and the county court would rule in favor of one or the other, and it was supposed to be impartial, and it was. A lot of Virginians had their land claims upheld. Something else we need to remember is in 1780, Pennsylvania outlaws slavery. Not outlaws it, but they institute gradual emancipation. There can be no new slaves in Pennsylvania. Existing slaves are allowed to stay. And one of the concessions they made to the Virginia settlers was that they could keep their slaves. So those are some of the details of the agreements that they worked out. Moving ahead a little bit, let me go back here. The tip of the panhandle that reaches up into Ohio, that is going to be called the point of beginning for a new Western survey for the Northwest Territory. So at this point where Pennsylvania and Ohio meet on the Ohio River is this marker. And this marker is where the Northwest Survey was begun, which established all the land settlements in these states, the Northwest Territory. And it was done on a grid system. That's why if you look at maps of the Midwestern states, everything is on a square, whereas a lot of the land settlements and things laid out to the east are kind of crazy boundaries, following rivers and mountains and things like that. So that's an outgrowth of this. And the area has, I just have to touch on some other history. In 1792, the Whiskey Rebellion happens in what's now Western Pennsylvania and Western Virginia and Western Maryland. And this is the original flag of the Whiskey Rebels. It's on display at a tavern in Pennsylvania. George Washington will march an army out to deal with the Whiskey Rebels. A lot of them were Virginia settlers who were upset about the tax imposed on whiskey. And as we move into the next century, the early 1800s, more development, more improvements. The National Road, which you can see a picture of here with this bridge, first federally funded highway running west from Cumberland, Maryland, through Pennsylvania into the Midwestern states, funneling settlers and growth and development into that new territory. And the last map that I'll show you just sort of summarizes Virginia's boundary over the years. You see the early 1609 claim. And then 1784, still with the Northwest Territory and Pennsylvania's boundary being settled. After the Revolution, 1792, the loss of Kentucky. And then, of course, during the Civil War, West Virginia is pulled away, those western counties pulled away from Virginia itself. And that's our current boundary today, unchanged since 1863. To me, this is fascinating because it's not well known about these events, but they're happening simultaneously with other events like the Revolution breaking out, the Shawnee War, Dunmore's War, things like that. And this area was lawless and unsettled for a long time until after this boundary dispute was figured out, and we have a sense of normalcy and legitimacy and government taking over. And then Pennsylvania will establish, obviously, counties through the late 1700s into the early 1800s. So today, obviously, Pittsburgh is in Pennsylvania, and there's more counties around it. But a lot of those early families were Virginians. Thank you for giving me the chance to talk about this.
That was really fascinating. Thank you so much, Bert. Absolutely. I do have a couple of questions
Sure.
that I'd like to ask you. So first of all, who were these settlers? Who went out there and why? Where did they come from?
Well, in the case of the Pennsylvanians, a lot of them are Scots, Irish, moving directly west across Pennsylvania. The eastern part of Pennsylvania was crowded.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a lot of land available. There's also a lot of Swiss and German settlers moving in. For the Virginians, moving up from the Shenandoah Valley, the area, moving up over those mountains in what's now West Virginia, looking for land. Some of them are moving directly west into West Virginia, but a lot of them are moving north into what's now Pennsylvania. A lot of them got land grants during the French and Indian War, but a lot of them are just getting land grants otherwise. Again, a lot of Virginia's eastern areas are settled, and the land isn't fertile and there's not land available. The available land is in the west.
Can you give us a proportion, a number, so we get an idea of how many people we're talking about? And maybe, do you have a number that compares the amount of people who settled in the disputed area in the Pennsylvania side versus the Virginia side?
I don't. I think that would probably be hard to come up with, but the sense I get is that most of the settlers are Virginians. Most of the area is settled by Virginians. Pennsylvania had fewer settlers, and they were mostly in the fringe around what's Hannahstown of that area. They hadn't settled through the whole thing, whereas the Virginians did.
Yeah. So, I mean, from your presentation, it does sound that people had already developed some kind of allegiance to a particular state, either Pennsylvania or Virginia. What motivated newcomers to either seek a land grant from Virginia versus Pennsylvania? How did they feel about these? I mean, obviously there was tension, but why go to Virginia or not Pennsylvania, or vice versa?
Do you mean settlers just coming in to the colonies?
Yeah.
I guess I'm not sure. That's not something I've researched. I know that Philadelphia was a huge port of entry, bigger than any of the ports that Virginia had. A lot of a lot of them are moving along what's now the Wagon Road, through the valley, and then probably moving west.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, that's pretty much the area that we focus on here at the museum. We talk about the 18th century frontier west in Virginia, west of the Blue Ridge Mountains. But as you said, there were a lot of other frontier areas. So I sometimes wonder what some people might think of these frontier areas as very isolated places as well. But that's not quite true from a very Euro-American perspective. Frontier areas were extensions of a larger transatlantic world, and these areas were connected to the East in one form or another. Subsistence farming, for example, gave way very quickly to produce for markets. So do you think that part of the tension between the frontier settlements, I mean, not necessarily about the disputed area your research focused on, but the larger frontier area? So you've got a frontier area in Pennsylvania, you've got one even further north, and then in Virginia. Do you think these frontier areas saw themselves as competitors for production for the Eastern markets with each other?
Absolutely. And that was even the case earlier in the French and Indian War. Virginia's settlers, look down to the coast. The Braddock Road would link them back to Virginia, to the settled areas, to Winchester, to Alexandria, down to Fredericksburg and Williamsburg, and that was their market. Goods moved down and up, and for the Pennsylvanians, it was sort of directly east over the Allegheny Mountains towards Philadelphia, and both states are in competition for that western land to expand their markets. Both of those areas competition, and looking back to those two more urban areas on the East Coast for their source of supply and the sort of the center of culture.
Mm. Yeah, and again, to this point of Americans, Anglo-Americans, European immigrants pushing steadily westwards, there seems to be this notion that they were all moving into empty land, and that's of course not true. I mean, we're talking about a region that was populated by very diverse and very culturally distinct American Indian nations. How did these nations react to this invasions of Anglo-Americans? You mentioned briefly that the French encouraged them to attack these American settlers in your presentation, but I'm sure that they didn't need much encouragement from any European nation to defend their homelands as well. Can you talk a little more about American Indian reaction to this invasion?
Sure. For the Native Americans, I can't even fathom it. It's 30 some years of on and off warfare, starting in the 1750s with what we call the French and Indian War, and then moving through Dunmore's War, and then the Revolutionary War, and then after that there's some fighting in Ohio, and then you get into the War of 1812, and it's just one thing after another. It's constant with little breaks. A lot of Native American groups had pushed out of the East, like from eastern Pennsylvania and New York and other areas, and settled in what's now western Pennsylvania. And then they come to find these other settlers moving in, and again, they get pushed further back. And of course, there's rivalries among the different Native Americans. I don't think they cared whether they were Virginians or Pennsylvanians. They're all encroaching on their land. And but again, some of the Indian groups are speaking for other groups, like the Iroquois, speaking for the Delaware, representing them, and passing off land that the Delaware don't want to give away. But by the end of this time period, by the end of the 18th century, going into the 19th century, western Pennsylvania and that eastern part of Ohio, a lot of the Native groups have been pushed out. It's a really tragic part of the story, but such a fast decline for those cultures.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bert, thank you very much. That was very, very interesting, and I'm sure that a lot of our viewers find it particularly engaging in regard to understanding frontier culture and everything that led to the development of such a distinct culture. But if any of the viewers have any further questions about this topic, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Sure, I'll give my email, and if I know you have another way to share my email as well, but it's lowercase bd1754@yahoo.com.
Perfect, and we'll make sure to share that in the comment box as well. So thank you once again, Bert, and thanks to all of our viewers for watching this lecture. I hope to see you again at the next installment of the lecture series 2020. which the Frontier Culture Museum of Virginia is bringing to you into your own home so you can still engage with our programs in a safe manner. So take care, everyone, and I hope to see you all soon.